Okay, I'm going to mute everybody. Forgive me for doing so. It just makes it easier for everyone else to hear. If you need to talk, please unmute yourself and make yourself heard. We have a very long double-headed portion, and a lot of it talks about holiness. And we've discussed the theme before, that from a Jewish point of view, holiness is not an event and specific place or specific person. It's interesting to trace the impact of holiness in our lives is to affect every aspect of living. Holiness is not only on Yom Kippur for the high priest in Jerusalem. No, it's not about the holiest place, holiest time, holiest person. It's not limited to that. It applies every single day of our lives. And we find holiness in the way we conduct our lives, the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we sleep, the way we do business. Every single aspect of our life can be impacted on holiness. And when we trace the many commandments that are spoken about, such a amount of commandments discussed in this Shabbat's reading, you're going to see the theme. Let's go through a summary of the first of two portions read this Shabbat. We read Acharei, which literally means it was after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who tragically died on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. It was after their death that they were given the commandments that related to the Kohanim. Firstly, it says that we have to be very careful when you walk into the Mishkan. The Mishkan was the temporary sanctuary in the desert. You don't just walk into a place of holiness. You prepare yourself, you wash your hands. You'll soon see there's a whole lot of preparation. You don't just walk in somasur. You actually know that you're going into a holy place. It then enumerates in great detail the order of the Kohen Gadol on the Yom Kippur day. Now, there's a whole tractate in the Talmud called the Tractate of Yuma, which, in fact, we're presently studying. And it is in that tractate that it spends a number of the first chapters talking about the order of the day for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest. Now, it's not totally unfamiliar to us because on Yom Kippur morning, in the Musaf service, which is a very long service for those who are sticking it out to be there all the way till the end of the service. So the latter part of that Musaf service is this whole expanded details of what the Kohen Gadol did where. Let me try and stir your memory. If you are in shul on Yom Kippur morning, late morning, it's already afternoon, the end of the first half of the day's service, not Mincha and Ne'ilah, which you come back to at the end of the day, but the later part of the morning service. So there's a part where we sing, and the Hazdan and the Rabbi, in fact, in Ashur now, everybody who can goes down on their knees and they bow down all the way to the floor. And we sing Aleinu l'shabeach. These are all things that probably ring with memories from Yom Kippur. That part of the whole service is reenacting what the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, did on Yom Kippur. He went from this room to that room. He wore his gold clothing, as we'll soon see, and then he wore only pure white clothing, and then he changed back into the gold clothing. And he was bringing sacrifices that were daily sacrifices brought every single day of the year, and then there were unique sacrifices and the bringing of incense, all that was done specifically on the day of Yom Kippur. So all that we read in our service, the later part of the Musaf service on Yom Kippur, is in fact the enlarged, more detailed rendition of what the Kohen Gadol did on Yom Kippur. That is the subject, the first section of this Shabbat's reading. He then speaks about the sacrifices that were brought on the Yom Kippur day, including a process of bringing two identical goats. Hopefully we'll come back to that. There was a lottery performed between these two goats. The one goat was sent out into the desert. The other was brought as a sacrifice, and they represented the two extreme possibilities that exist in this world and in our own lives. That which becomes completely absorbed in holiness, and that which is, in fact, irrelevant to the world of holiness. And they're two extremes. We'll come back to that point. Then speaks about the laws of Yom Kippur. So the first section of this Shabbat's reading is the holies, the holy day of Yom Kippur and the holiness that is achieved on that day. So on the day of Yom Kippur, we have 5 major commandments that we are prohibited to partake of. We're not allowed to fast. Firstly, we do fast. We're not allowed to anoint ourselves with oil or with cosmetics or with anything that is pleasurable. We don't wear leather shoes. We know that we wear khakis or we wear non-leather shoes. We don't wash and bathe ourselves. Marital relations is prohibited. Eating, drinking. All of those things are prohibited on the day of Yom Kippur. It then continues to speak about no blood can be consumed. It spoke about in quite a lot of great length that we do not eat blood because blood is the lifeline of an animal. And if we are entitled to eat the animal, we don't eat the blood itself. And we know in the whole koshering process, one of the major details is to remove all of the blood. We salt it. Nowadays we buy it from the butcher store. We have no idea what happens beyond the plastic that it's wrapped in. But for a kid who grew up in Johannesburg, when my father would bring home meat and we would salt it and prepare it and rinse it and all the things that were done on a board in our backyard at home. There's also a law of kisui hadam, and that is covering the blood of the animal that has been shechted, that has been slaughtered, particularly when it came to birds and it came to wild animals, which are kosher. So again, the blood had to be treated with great respect, and we weren't allowed to partake of it. Then, in the second, final part of the first portion, read the Shabbat, it veers dramatically, and it talks about all the things that we should not emulate the people of Egypt at that time, who were known to be a very corrupt and immoral people, Kamaasei Eretz Mitzrayim, like the acts and the deeds of Egypt. We should never ever behave and perpetuate through our own behavior. And it lists many, many details of immoral activity, including like really way out stuff, like child sacrifices and all the things that they did, we're not allowed to do. A whole lot of laws of immorality that a person should not be involved in. I'm talking about bestiality, all crazy, not marrying one's sister and one's mother and one's, all laws of immorality. Now, the very strange thing, which we're going to come back to as well, is that is also read on Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur reading is taken from this Shabbat's reading. What we read on Yom Kippur morning is about the Kohen Gadol and where he did his service and how he went through the day. That all happens on Yom Kippur morning. Yom Kippur afternoon, believe it or not, the subject of the Torah reading on Yom Kippur afternoon is that we should not behave as the ancient Egyptians did, a totally hedonistic and immoral society, and it enumerates all the crazy practices they did. When do we read that? On Yom Kippur afternoon. Now, if we're thinking of holiness, holiness is achieved at the service on Kol Nidre, and then we fasted a whole day in the morning. We've been through the whole process of the Kohen Gadol. We're now in the last waning hours of Yom Kippur. We're probably the holiest we ever are throughout the entire year. And what is the subject that we're reading about? Not to behave as they behaved in, and to enumerate the details of how people can descend and become decadent and become absolutely extremely involved in very, very suspect and crazy way out practices. Now that's a subject we'll come back to as well. How could that be the subject of Yom Kippur afternoon? And we'll tie it up with this whole theme of where do we find holiness as a Jew? We find holiness as a Jew in the holies of holies on Yom Kippur with the Kohen Gadol. Yes, there is that element of holiness. And then there is another whole realm of holiness, how we behave as human beings. And the holiness of the inner chambers of the holies of holies has to be applied and relevant and impact on the most practical details of our lives so that we live like a mensch, like a person should aspire to live. Moving on to the second portion that's read, the Shabbat, it's in fact called Kedoshim. Kedoshim means holy, the holies. Now, in this second section, the second portion that we read the Shabbat, it's a double header. It doesn't, in this section, talk about the Kohen Gadol going into the holies of holies. It speaks about a whole lot of human behavior. There are many, many diverse rules. In general, it says, be holy. And then it moves into talking about, and I've just taken a very small sampling of the laws that it deals with and how we find holiness as a Jew. This is a fundamental understanding of where holiness is. It's not just about Yom Kippur for the high priest. It's about you and me in the way we conduct our lives and interpersonal relationships, how we behave as a human being. That's where holiness has to be found in our lives. So, for example, it speaks about, yes, idolatry, you shouldn't serve idols. Then it speaks about eating certain part of the sacrifices that are prohibited. And then it talks that that's more ritual between us and God. But then it speaks about theft, robbery, taking a false oath, being dishonest, that you pay your employee on time and not an hour or a minute late, that there is a prohibition against hating somebody, not talking slander, not putting a stumbling block in front of them, which is very practical. Don't put a brick in front of somebody who's walking and might trip on it, but it also implies that's metaphorically for any advice that you give somebody where you could cause them to stumble. It speaks about setting up a justice system, avoiding assisting others in dangers. Obviously, that's a prohibition. You can't turn your eyes, somebody's drowning, and you decide that you don't want to get wet or you don't want to waste your time. So you have a responsibility to help people who are in danger, not to embarrass somebody, not to take revenge, not to hold grudges, not to cause crossbreeding of animals and fruits. And wearing a cross between that which grew from the ground, which is flax, and that which is sheared from an animal, which is wool. So our clothing should not contain wool and linen in one. It's called shatnez, and also goes into this whole section about crossbreeds. Orla means not eating the fruits of the fruit tree for the first 3 years. The results of intoxication and the prohibition about allowing one to get into a state where one is not in control, witchcraft, shaving the corners of one's beard with a razor, which is not allowed by Torah law, and taking off the payas, which is the sideburns over here. We know that some people have very long sideburns that go down, but not to shave the sides of one's head. And believe it or not, something that is quite relevant today, which is tattoos. Tattoos are not allowed. We don't write on our bodies, which only lent to us by Hashem. They actually belong to God. So we have to treat them with respect and with care and health. And we're not allowed to indelibly imprint on our bodies, such as in a tattoo. And then there's a whole lot of positive commandments that you have to have awe for parents. Very, very novel in today's world today, where children call their parents by their first name, which was never the practice in times of old. And parents are scared, more scared of children than children are scared of parents. Unfortunately, the influence of parents is therefore much less, unfortunately for the children. That we should respect the elders, we should give gifts to the poor, we should be compassionate, we should take care of those who are less fortunate than ourselves, we should love. We should only, what happens with the 4th year fruits, you have to be taken to Jerusalem to be eaten. You should respect Torah scholars, take care of the blind, take care of the deaf, eat kosher. Holiness to retain the land of Israel. If you want to hold on to the land of Israel, we have to act holy. But look how holy is now a totally different definition. We're suddenly not talking about the Kohen Gadol wearing his holy cloak and clothing on the Yom Kippur day, going into the holies of holies, which is how we started the whole journey. But holy, holy, holy in every wholesome way, holy in the way we talk and we do business and we're honest and we are respectful and we care for others and we look after the poor. Holiness applies in every realm of our life. That is the Jewish understanding of holiness. Yes, it happens in Shul on Shabbos, but that would limit God and holiness if that was the full extent of our understanding of holiness. It applies in so many other diverse areas of our life. let's try and go into some of the issues that we could derive life messages from. And there's so much, I hope I can get through some of it. I mentioned in passing that the two sons of Aaron tragically died on the first day of the inauguration of the sanctuary. Can you imagine the excitement? We spoke about it 2 weeks ago, where it was also mentioned that Aaron and Moses were so excited they got together this house of Hashem, which was going to atone for the terrible, tragic sin of dancing around the golden calf. And now God had told them how to build a home for Hashem and how to behave in that place. On the very first day, two of the four sons of Aaron die in a fire. It's not actually clear what their sin was. And generally, there's interpretations that say that they behaved very badly and therefore they were punished. But if you look at the actual wording in the verse that describes the death of the two sons of Aaron, it says, Acharei, it was after the death, that's the name of this week's first portion, after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who came close to God and died. Now, I haven't got the whole verse quoted here, but it says, it was after the death of the two sons of Aaron who came close to God and they died. Now, the obvious question is, why would it say that they died twice in the same verse? We said it was after the death and they died. Secondly, what does it mean, who came close to God and died? So the Or HaChaim, one of the very spiritual interpretations and commentaries on the Torah, he says that they had an approach in how they came close to God. They came close to God wanting to expire. They felt that the physical world, the world of eating and sleeping and physical requirements, was a deterrent to our ability to cleave to God. They wanted their souls to soar, to fly, to be able to reach for that which is transcendent of this world, not being limited by this world. So the verse is actually saying that these two sons had very spiritual intentions. They came close to God and died, meaning that they came close to God in a way that they should die. They wanted to expire because they felt that this world was such a limiting world on the journey of a soul which transcends this world. They didn't want to be here. And therefore, he describes it, they divide by the divine kiss, such as experienced by the perfectly righteous. Although they sensed their own demise, this did not prevent them from drawing near. They said, I don't mind. I want to expire from this world. That's how the Or HaChaim describes it, the death of the two sons of Aaron. So what could be wrong with two individuals who had such a passionate desire for the spiritual that they didn't want to be held down in a physical world? They actually wanted to transcend it, and they were consumed in a fire that consumed them. Almost a fulfillment of their dream. So what did they do wrong? So Hasidus, and I can't explain it completely in a part of a shir, this itself would be a number of shiurim to explain the concept of Ratzah and Shuv, but in short, Hasidus explains that our journey is constantly a pendulous motion of aspiring to the holy, wanting to expire, to escape, to leave the limitations of this world, and then the return of that pendulous motion, which is the recognition that God put me in this world for a purpose. If he wanted angels that were floating about in a transcendence of this world, he didn't need to create us. He created the human being to be able to affect a physical world, to operate inside of the realm of a physical world, to deal with the business practices that the world would normally have shortcuts of dishonesty and misrepresentation, and to bring holiness into that realm so that one has absolute integrity. In our interpersonal relationships, to care, to love, to uplift, to look after the poor, etc. That's our responsibility. And as this is now the theme that Hasidut explains, that happens in our life all the time while we're not noticing. You see, we often think that the middle of the road, which the Rambam often describes we should all be in the middle of the road. We think the middle of the road means don't engage the right and the left. Stay in the middle. Not this extreme and not that extreme. Just stay in the middle. But there's a problem in the middle of the road. The problem of the middle of the road is that you live a life that is tepid, that is nishta aher and nishta hin. It's not hot and it's not cold. Life is about experiencing extremes, but to always realize that it's a pendulous motion. So we don't have an average of living somehow between the weekdays and Shabbat. We move through extreme modes. 6 days we work. We go to work and we make our money and we're involved in business and we have to take care of all of the mundane physical things. And just as we're getting comfortable, at the end of 6 days to say, fine, I now know that this is my job, I have to work, comes Shabbat and Hashem says, let go. Don't work. Now, the order of the day is to hand over all of that to another realm in Hashem's world and live a day of Shabbat. Not distracted, not involved, disengaged from all of those mundane things. You're not now on the receiving end of your cell phone that is dragging you and holding you and keeping every element of your mind all the time. You actually put it away, and your computer, and you're able to talk to your kids, and you're able to talk and be involved and daven and be in shul and be with people and get your mind back. And as you get used to a whole day of Shabbos, that's that pendulous motion, comes the end of Shabbos, and the guy's quite used to lying in his hammock, hung between two trees. He's enjoying life. This is the life. I love Shabbos. Comes the end of Shabbos, Hashem says, no. Now get off your hammock and go and make a living. Go back to work. And that's how we live our life. We live our life with a pendulous motion, moving between the mundane and the holy, constantly. And we make Kiddush as we move from the one world into Shabbos, and we make Havdalah, another bracha, as we move from Shabbos into the weekday, because we're constantly moving in the presence of Hashem. It's not taking leave of holiness. It's aspiring to holiness and applying the holiness. Applying the holiness and aspiring to transcend. Aspiring to transcend so that you can further apply even more. That's the motion. We're constantly through it. And all of our Yomim Tovim and our festivals and our special events are constantly showing that the real Jewish experience isn't the average. It's not to find the middle of the road that you don't ever leave just what's being average. You're going to be a parava Jew, an insipid, unexcited, unenthusiastic person. The middle of the road is achieved by the motion, by the mean, between the extreme angles that are created by the pendulous motion. That is what holds us together, and it's what didn't hold the two sons of Aaron. They were into escapism. We're going to run out of this world. We're going to leave it. We don't want to be held down. Hashem says, no. Holiness from a Jewish point of view is not to expire from this world. That will happen to the soul at the end of our lifetime. Our responsibility is to apply it. But when we get so involved by applying and involved in business and work, and we could run out of steam, we can forget to aspire. So we have to cut ourselves off and then aspire, and then cut ourselves off and apply. That's the movement of being holy. Holy completely, through and through, in every element of our life, not escaping this world, but applying it into this world. That is a realm and a theme that we could spend days on, and many discourses in Hasidus, but it's a very beautiful approach to understanding how Judaism looks at holiness. It doesn't exist on a Himalayan mountain that you rush up to meditate on and to leave all of the distractions of this world. That happens in other religions. Our religion says, yes, go up the mountain, but come back down the mountain and apply it to all of the other areas and to all the people around you. That's the pendulous motion of constantly being in motion and movement between the different realms. Now, in keeping with this is a very practical application of it. The Kohen Gadol washed his hands 10 times. If you think we're washing our hands during COVID excessively, speak to the Kohen Gadol in the temple 10 times. In fact, he went to the mikveh and immersed himself in the mikveh on the day of Yom Kippur 5 times. And if we take that apart, we actually see that he got up in the morning and he dressed in his regular Kohen Gadol clothing. There were 8 of them, 4 of the regular Kohen, plus golden implements, 4 more, which he would wear every single day. And he wore as he started his day on Yom Kippur. But then when he went into the Holies of Holies, he had to remove any semblance of gold and reference to gold. And he went in pure white linen clothing only. And when he changed from his golden clothing into the white linen clothing, he went to the mikveh. Then he went back to doing work outside, where he once again had to wear his golden clothing. So he went back to the mikveh again. Then he went back to retrieve the implements from the Holies of Holies in his white clothing. He changed, so he went to the mikveh again. And then he ended the day in his regular golden clothing. He went to the mikveh again. So he changed 5 times. If you think, if you're using all the references in shul, sometimes when women come to shul on Yom Kippur, I don't want to say this disparagingly, but it is a relevant thing, that there is definitely a different outfit for the night of Yom Kippur, and then there's a different outfit for the morning of Yom Kippur, and God forbid you don't want to wear the same outfit when you come back in the afternoon of Yom Kippur. You got to make an impression, so you got to dress in at least three different forms of clothing in the day of Yom Kippur. But the Kohen Gadol changed 5 times. And I've explained why, because in the Holies of Holies, he was dressed only in plain white. So you could say, I could understand the argument that he needed to go to the mikveh, which is an added dimension of achieving purity, when he went from the regular activity into the Holies of Holies. Okay, so that's he needed to go to the mikveh. But why, when he came from the mikveh, from the Holies of Holies, back into the regular realm of his life, which is now stepped down, did he need to go to the mikveh then? Surely we need the mikveh when we upgrade in holiness, not when we're moving down from the Holies of Holies into the regular space of the Kohen Gadol. But let's keep the theme that we're talking about. It's a pendulous motion of spiritual and growth in holiness. The Kohen Gadol needed to go to the mikveh when he moved into the Holies of Holies. But when he left the Holies of Holies, it wasn't about descent. It wasn't about going down. It was taking the Holies of Holies into the realm of the more regular. That was a step up, a step down in terms of the realms of defined holiness. But in terms of taking from the inner chambers and applying it to the external responsibilities of life, it was a step up, because that's application. And then as he was applying it, he went back into the Holies of Holies. Now he dressed in his white clothing. It was a step up. He went to the mikveh. When he came out, again, he wasn't going down, he was applying. And when you apply, the highest level of holiness, from a Jewish point of view, is not, ironically, the Holies of Holies. It might not even be the day of Yom Kippur. It's when you take the day of Yom Kippur, when you take the Holies of Holies and you apply it into your life, that is the application of the Holies of Holies, which in a sense is a step even beyond. That's the theme that we're talking about. Holiness has to be applied. And each time he went to the mikveh, he washed his hands and feet. You know, when we wash the Kohen's hands these days, thank God we don't have to wash his feet as well. The Leviim would be very, very busy washing feet as well. They just wash his hands, thank God. But the Kohen Gadol had to wash his hands and feet each time before and after he went to the mikveh. 5 times 2 is 10. So all of this is described, if you're watching the English carefully in the Magzah and you're not rushing home early on Yom Kippur, in the Musaf service, you will read all about these things in the Yom Kippur Magzah. Okay, this time is rushing out, but we said there was a lottery that was performed, and the Gemara in Yuma speaks at very great length that the 2 goats had to be identical. They had to look the same, they had to cost the same, they had to have the same, in every way they were the same. There was a lottery performed in a box called the Kalpi, where they would draw out the 2 lots, and the one would say, La Hashem, this will be a sacrifice to God in the temple, and the other one would say, La Azazel, that was sent into the wilderness to a precipice in the desert. And this is obviously very symbolic and metaphorical. It's talking about the different destinations of a Jew on the day of Yom Kippur. We're saying that we might be standing in a place today, but where we're heading and the possibilities of where we're heading are very extreme. You know, train tracks, when they begin to turn, you don't have 90-degree turns on the train track. You have just a very subtle deviation. But within 10, 15, 100 meters, the train is going in an opposite direction. A human being has to always be aware of the fact that we have a part of ourselves that makes us higher than angels. We have a part of ourselves that is lower than animals. And we need to know that there are two different destinations. We don't have a safe ground. Let's just cling to the center and then we'll be normal for the rest of our life. We have to always be aware of the extreme potentials of a human being, to stand higher than angels and to stoop lower than animals. And we need to constantly see those two possible destinations. I remember as a kid in Hasidim Shul on Harry Road, there was an individual who walked into Shul. It was the early 70s, so this was somebody who was left over from the 60s. He had this huge afro hairstyle, wearing a hippie white t-shirt with faded denims, and he walked into a shul where everyone was dressed in beautiful three-piece suits, looking at their Yom Kippur best. And this guy looked like a vagabond, like a scraggly, dressed inappropriately, walks into shul, and the rabbi, Rabbi Lipska, who's now presently in Hyde Park, who was the rabbi of our shul when I was a teenager. So he said that he wants to give this guy an honor to open the ark. So there was a whole tumult in the shul. Is this appropriate? In our shul, where people are dressed so beautifully for Yom Kippur, we're going to let a guy who looks scraggly and inappropriate and disrespectful to the space and time of Yom Kippur. How does a Jew walk into a shul in denims? Okay, I'm talking about the 70s, right? And it wasn't like a top hat shul, but they still had their standards. So there was a big argument, and the rabbi would not back down, and he said, he's a guest shul, he wants him to have psichos and he should open the ark. So he went up and he opened the ark, and there was a big tumult in the shul. But the next year, this guy was studying in yeshiva. He made a change in his life, turned his life around. Today he's a very holy scribe. He lives in America. He has a family, and he is a very holy individual. The next year he was in yeshiva, and I remember that year Rabbi Lipska gave a very, very strong speech to all present, and he said, look, we were here last year in our suits, very appropriately dressed for Yom Kippur. And a year later, we're in exactly the same place. Same seats, maybe the same suits, same headspace. And here was an individual who walked into our domain, and he looked like he didn't belong. So we judged him. We wanted to censure him. Tut, tut, tut. How could he do this? Look how holy we are. And he's so unholy. But you don't assess a person, said Rabbi Lipsky in that speech, which left a very big impact on me. You don't assess people and not ourselves, by where we are in a singular moment. The real question is where we're heading. Are we on a trajectory of growth? Are we developing? Are we aspiring to something higher? Are we embracing something more important? Or are we stuck? And we think that we're so perfectly in place, but we don't move. From one Yom Kippur, another Yom Kippur, another Yom Kippur, and we're the same individuals, we're not growing. And here was an individual who came in and looked like he was so inappropriate, and his entrance into Yom Kippur was the goat that was heading to be the inner chambers and the highest elements of sacrifice for Hashem. So it left a very strong impact on me that we should assess ourselves and people around us and things by the extreme possibilities of destination, not where we are. You can never ever know where we are by just looking at where we are. We have to see the context. Are we developing? Are we growing? Are we? And that is what it talks about. And that ties up so incredibly with this whole theme of holiness and applied holiness, that on the morning of Yom Kippur, we read about the Kohen Gadol in the holy inner chambers, the holies of holies. That's the reading of Yom Kippur morning. Yom Kippur afternoon, don't commit an act of immorality with an animal, not with your mother, and not with your daughter-in-law, not with your sister. I mean, who on Yom Kippur afternoon is thinking about those kinds of extreme, inappropriate human behavior? But the day of Yom Kippur is telling us there are two goats, and they're heading in different destinations. A human being has the capacity to be higher than angels and lower than animals. Don't ever feel secure with yourself being perched in a particular place where you think you're safe for the rest of your life. Always see the possibilities of a human being to rise, to grow, to develop, to aspire, and chas v'shalom, to degenerate and become lower than the beasts of the field. And that's what we tell ourselves on Yom Kippur. The two extremes. That's why on Yom Kippur afternoon, we're talking about the worst behaviors that no person on Yom Kippur afternoon is ever thinking about committing such sin. What we're telling ourselves is know that either the train tracks are taking us up, or God forbid, if we miss the turn, know where we can descend to. Look at where a human being can land up. And that we have a responsibility of aspiring. And time is running out. So let's move on. There is so many beautiful things to speak about. So the second section, let me speak about this pasuk. It says, Ela mitzvahs, these are the commandments that I've given you, v'chai bahem, and you will live by them. So there are many different commentaries. I've quoted 3 or 4 here. What does it mean that you'll keep the mitzvahs and you will live with them? So the Ramban gives a very simple interpretation. These are the commandments that define morality, that define appropriate human behavior, and you will live by them. Because if you don't perform these, aspire to this elevated form of living, idas nicht kein Leben, then it is not life. You want to know how life happens? Life happens when you live a life that is filled with morality and purpose and meaning. So v'chai b'hem means if you want to live in this world, really live, then you have to have a code. You have to have a moral conscience. That is what gives life. Moving into a totally different interpretation. The commentaries, Chazal mentioned in the Gemara, is v'chai b'hem means that these are the mitzvahs I'm giving you and you will live in them. If you're ever caught between a decision to perform a mitzvah and to give up your life, there are only 3, I'm calling them the big 3 commandments where you have to give up your life in order to perform the mitzvah. What are the big 3? Not to kill, not to commit idolatry, and not to commit adultery. In those cases, if a person comes to you and says, kill that individual or I will kill you, one has to give one's life. If a person comes and says, bow down to this idol or I will kill you, one has to give one's life. Commit adultery or I will kill you, one has to give one's life. But any other situation, Shabbos, keeping kosher, any other Jewish law, life comes first. So the general Gemara's interpretation, keep all the mitzvahs, v'chai b'hem, and live by them, in general, 99% of the time, you have to live rather than give up your life to do a mitzvah. Yes, you have to do a mitzvah, but life comes first. If you have a choice between keeping Shabbos and, God forbid, losing your life, you rather, 3 of my 4 children were born on Shabbos, and we drove to the hospital and we made sure that everything that was taking, what I would never normally do on a Shabbos, because it was a matter of looking after life. So I didn't do something vaguely wrong. That was the call of the hour. It was my responsibility to break Shabbos, which wasn't considered a negative. That was the call of the hour, to preserve life. Only the big 3, but otherwise, v'chai b'hem, choose life rather than the mitzvah. The Chidush Harim speaks about v'chai b'hem. These are the mitzvahs I'm giving you, Don't do it by rote. Don't do it by habit. V'chai b'hem. Live in them. Live it up. Be alive. Be enthusiastic. Be passionate with your Judaism. Don't drag your feet as though you're carrying a burden. But v'chai b'hem. Live. Okay, that's a totally different, more spiritual interpretation of the words. And then one of the commentaries says, v'chai b'hem means that we have a choice in our fulfillment of the commandments of Hashem. What drives us to keep the mitzvahs? Kaddish or Kiddush? Yes, we know that shuls and minyanim are very much built on the back of Kaddish. The people who have lost loved ones, they need to say Kaddish, they come to shul, they help make the minyan. So shul is often driven by the need to say Kaddish. And let's just take it out of the technicality of Kaddish. What we're saying is our Judaism an expression of, and is driven by the pain, by the loss, or is our Judaism driven by the possibilities of aspiring, of being more enthusiastic, of being alive, of enjoying what it is that makes us Jewish? Which one is it? And the responsibility always is to rather let it be a Judaism of Kiddush rather than a Judaism of Kaddish. When we talk about post-Holocaust Judaism, there were many decades where Judaism was defining itself about emerging from the tragedy of the Holocaust. And certainly there was so much that needs to be remembered and so much that we need to aspire from the Holocaust. But Judaism is not post-Holocaust. Judaism is pre-Moshiach. Judaism is optimistic, is hopeful, is looking forward with a realization that there's a better world waiting for us. We should not only be driven by having to respond to a Holocaust, and obviously we need to know, we need to read, we need to be aware, but we can't allow our Judaism to be totally driven by the pain, by the Kaddish. It has to be driven by the possibilities of Kiddush. A happy moment, a happy shared moment, a Shabbos, a Yontif, the beauty of our religion. So B'chai B'hem has been explained, these are the mitzvahs, live for the mitzvahs. Don't see Judaism as the aftermath of death, but the precursor to life. And now we're really running out of time, so let me choose which one it is that we're going to do. Okay, very short point, and then hopefully I'll be able to say one more. And that is that it says twice in the Torah that you have to honor your parents and you have to fear. I think the better word is revere. Revere your parents. So one time it says you'll honor, and there it says your father and your mother. And then when it says you will fear or revere, it says your mother and your father. So it says mother before father when it comes to reverence, and father before mother when it comes to honor. So the Gemara explains that it's human nature, that who does one turn to if one wants chocolate? You turn to your mother. She's the soft target. You're going to convince her that she's going to make life easier for you. So the natural thing is to honor your mother because there's a good investment in what the return might be. When it comes to fear, who do you normally fear? Fear your father. The father can give you a good zet, so you're worried more about your father. So counterintuitively, the Torah turns it upside down and says, honor your father and your mother. Your natural tendency is to honor your mom more than your dad, so it puts dad first. When it comes to reverence and respect and fear, it says your mother and your father, puts the mother first because your natural tendency is your father. So, but both of these are necessary. There's a definition of honor, which means don't sit in his seat, bring him, make his life comfortable, honor him, give him things that are going to make the father happy. Respect is don't speak in his presence before he speaks. Don't contradict your parents. Stand when they enter the room. All things that the modern world has rejected because they think parents should be standing up when the kids walk into the room. We got it the wrong way around. It results in a very complicated world. But from a Torah point of view, honor and respect for mothers and for fathers is vitally important. We need to set the standards in our homes that our kids know as das is our mama and our tata, and there is the respect and the love. You don't just call your parent by their first name, even if that's what's common. You say father. You use respectful terminology. It's amazing. It's not what the world is used to nowadays. Let me try and pick one more thought that I can share with you. Maybe I've got to leave this for another day. We'll talk about love and loving our fellow. It's just not enough time to get through this. Let me try and speak about one more thing. It says that you should rebuke your fellow person, but it says it in two terminologies. Rebuke your fellow. Why does it say it twice? So Hasidus explains, it says it twice because before you rebuke somebody else, we should rebuke ourselves. We should have an ability to resolve ourselves before we're resolving the whole world around us. So it's not a double rebuke towards somebody else. It says the one is dedicated to ourselves. Rebuke oneself, and then the Baal Shem Tov elaborated on that whole topic and said that, and I'll end with this. The Baal Shem Tov said that the world is a mirror, and what we see in the world around us is actually a mirror image, a reflection of ourselves. So when we see a world that is bitter, negative, harsh, we see all the complications, we see all the warts. What is actually happening is we're having an opportunity to see that our own life needs resolution. So why would God show me something negative in myself by viewing it in somebody else? I happen to see that the next person is misbehaving, and the Baal Shem Tov says that's a good opportunity to pause and to say, if I've noticed this terrible bad behavior in somebody else, it's my opportunity to apply it to myself. I should realize that it's a mirror. But why would God show me myself in somebody else? Why doesn't he just show me myself in me? Why do I need to see it in somebody else? Well, guess what happens when we are aware of our own failings? What's our first reaction? We're immediately defensive. We immediately explain. We quantify. We limit. We contextualize. We have a million excuses. We don't like seeing our own faults and flaws. We're always explaining away that it's not really my fault and it's not really so bad and this is the reason why. We've got excuses. But somebody else, and somebody else does something wrong, we jump on them. Terrible thing that they did. So Hashem needs to let us see it in somebody else, because when we see it in ourselves, we don't see it. But when we see it in somebody else, because that's our natural tendency, then the Baal Shem Tov says it's the opportunity. Yeah, maybe an opportunity to help that individual improve their life, but most unlikely, because very few people can help other people improve the moral standing of their life. You have to be a good friend, you have to be invested, you have to care, you have to have contributed so much to that person's life positively for that person to take your reprimand in a way that's going to actually build them. They're going to say, thank you very much. Thank you for pointing out my fault. I really appreciate you telling me how bad I am, and I'm going to improve. What are the chances? It's going to happen if it's a best friend, if it's a good marriage, and a husband and a wife are talking, and they're able to point out failings because you know that it's coming from such a place of love and care, and therefore I'm grateful for you pointing out my weakness. But for the average regular person, we're not going to help that person very easily change their moral standing. So the Baal Shem Tov says, so why do I see it in them? It's in order to be able to see it in myself. And this is a very beautiful, complicated way of looking at life. Every time we see a weakness, the Baal Shem Tov says, close your eyes and try and find it in yourself. Firstly, we stop looking for weaknesses because it becomes quite painful every time to see the weakness and then apply it to ourselves. We stop seeing the weaknesses in others because we know how relevant it's going to become in our own lives. So we stop seeing with negativity, we only see positivity. But rebuke means look at yourself and look at yourself through looking at somebody else. Life is a mirror. I wish I could carry on. I'm only up to slide number 13 out of 18. We need more time, but that's the story of life. Maybe I should have planned this a bit better in how I was presenting. But thank you so much for joining. You can unmute yourself completely. Adi, I didn't see you before. Nice to see you. Always good to see the Bloombergs, my dear friends. I don't know who else I missed before. Peter, nice to see you. Sam, welcome. Barry, thank you for coming to Shul last night. Nice to have you around. Jonathan, again, thank you for being here. Lance, all the way from Israel, wonderful to see you. Evie, nice to see you. Lynette, thank you. Helene, beautiful. Richard, nice to have you with us. Lawrence Peter, thank you. Lauren Apple, we should just hear good news every single day. We're davening and saying Tehillim with your family. May we only hear good news. Doreen, oh, I see Feigi's on. Nice to see my wife, very special, good, wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Rabbi.
you, Rabbi.
Wonderful words. Thank you.
Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.